So those are two different claims. The first claim is that you have white privilege, and the second one is that any argument against that is proof of it. So let's take the first one first. I actually do believe that there's such a thing as white privilege. I believe that certain people on the basis of their skin color are treated differently. But my disagreement with many of the woke is how we go about dealing with that. So the second part of the question was particularly unusual. Any denial of the fact that you have white privilege means that you're guilty of having white privilege. But that argument doesn't work with anything else. It doesn't work with rhinoceroses. It doesn't work with witches. The denial of the fact that you're a witch doesn't mean you're a witch. They're totally unrelated. I would ask if the same argument works for anything else. Does that work for witches? Does that work for zebras? Does the denial of the fact that you're a witch indicate that you're a witch or lead to the truth of the statement that you're a witch? Yeah, that's a very, very, very difficult question. And so how do you maintain the line between being authentic and getting your degree? I think the key is to understand that I don't necessarily think it's most professors. It depends on the institution. It depends on the field of study. Certainly in the humanities, it's the case. Most professors look at the institution as their own private indoctrination mill. So the goal for these educators is to indoctrinate people into a worldview or a particular ideology. So you have a choice. You can speak up and risk getting poor grades, or you can remain silent and toe the party line. I suppose you have three choices in that case. If you choose to speak up, there will be consequences. If you watch the social justice reverse Q&A at Portland State University that I did last year, you'll see that students talk about what those consequences are. Actually, Travis, you filmed that. So you have a choice to make. Certainly in your own personal life, it's always better to be authentic than it is to be inauthentic. And it's always better to be forthright in your speech, because then you can have more genuine relationships. In a classroom setting, however, it is different. You'll have to weigh whether or not you will risk punishment. But the key thing to think about is, well, there are two keys to think about. One, remember, professors view the university system and their role to indoctrinate you, to have you adopt a particular ideology and worldview. And two, how bad do you want your degree? It's highly unlikely that they'll fail you unless you really go against the orthodoxy. But it's more than likely you'll get a bad grade and that you'll be disqualified from letters of recommendation, etc. There are two parts to that question. One is how they should react, and two is what they should do. How they should react is that they should be cool as a cucumber. Again, the idea is you don't want to show anger, you don't want to show rage. That just proves the narrative that you have something wrong with you, you're just an angry person. Where in fact, that's just not true. It's almost like you're witnessing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where people's minds have been taken over by a mind virus. And so you being upset isn't going to do anything. So what you should do is another question as opposed to how you should react. So how you should react is calmly, keep your composure. What you should do is a more complicated question. One of the things a student should do is document. Document, make public, find other individuals who have similar experiences. There's a page on Instagram, Woke at Something, where people post their videos. If you're doing Zoom classes, as long as it's legal, check the law. If your professor says something deranged, capture that and then post that to those pages, again, within the confines of the law. So making as much of this stuff public as possible is one of the best ways to help. The other thing you can do is find organizations either within the school or outside the school who are fighting and organizing against this madness. Because at the base, you are not alone. There are other people. It might feel like you're alone, but you're not alone. So find those people and see if you can contribute your particular skill set. The best way is to remember that they're your kids and you should always love them and treat them with kindness and decency and compassion. And the more you stray from that, the more difficult it will be to help them. People change their views from the position of psychological safety. We know this. The research literature is absolutely overwhelming. That's why the whole quote-unquote punching Nazis thing a few years ago achieved the opposite effect in terms of whether or not someone would actually change their beliefs. People hunker down in adversarial relationships. So the first order of business is to create a loving, sensitive, listening environment. Once you have that environment set up, it's easier to help people navigate difficult conversations and difficult life issues. But the most important thing is not how to react, but how not to react. Don't react with anger. Don't react with rage. Don't shout at somebody. Model the behavior that you want to see in others. They can ask them how they know it, how they know what they think they know. They could ask them how confident they are in the belief that it's true. They could ask them where it came from, where the belief came from. In all of those cases, focusing on the epistemology or how they know what they claim to know is the root out of a belief system. It's not focusing on the claims. It's not attacking the claims. It's questioning the claims so that they can come to doubt the beliefs themselves. It's not you telling them that the beliefs are false or bad or wrong or evil, but it's them doubting whether or not the beliefs are true. And the only way that comes is through psychologically safe environments and questions that target epistemology or how people know what they claim to know. That is a very difficult question. The most important thing is that you work that out with your spouse and you don't take that out on your children. And so if there's a disagreement, it should be talked about with your spouse. It's extraordinarily difficult to raise children, period, given the demands of modern life. If two people have different religious backgrounds, that makes it even more difficult and muddies the water. But with religion, usually people can talk about it ahead of time. And more often than not, people aren't sudden converts to a religion like wokeism. So if somebody is woke and somebody is not woke, that's springing something on the partner that wasn't there beforehand and people couldn't agree. So that makes raising children difficult. The most important thing is you want to buttress the children from the disagreement, and you want to attempt to figure out with your spouse beforehand how you would navigate issues. Now, there will be some issues that are simply incommensurable. Your spouse wants to teach them about anti-racism, what have you, and the other individual in the partnership doesn't want to. That, again, has to be worked out in the confines of the relationship. Possibly, to be blunt, if it cannot be worked out, maybe separation is best. My feeling, however, though, is that we will sort most of this stuff out in a few years, and the people who have been brain damaged by the woke virus, they will shed those beliefs. The first thing they need to do is show up. You have to show up to meetings. You have to show up to events, public events. If you watch Benjamin Boyce's videos about equity in the state of Washington, one of the things you see is how few people attend those meetings. You have to show up. You have to film. Film is always better than paper documents. If they have paper documents, take photos of those. And then try to post those online. That's one thing you can do. The second thing you can do is you can join particular organizations to fight back, like the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And there are constantly organizations springing up. Asra Nomani does some wonderful work. Many people do some wonderful work. The third thing you can do is you can educate yourselves. You can read about the subject matter. You can go to James Lindsay's New Discourses page. You can read Cynical Theories with Helen Pluckrose, and Helen has 2 new books coming out this year about how to fight back against woke ideology. And very important, one of the things you can do is you can find whatever your skill set is. Are you a lawyer? Are you an artist? Are you a writer? And you can offer to make contributions. They don't have to be financial contributions. You can dedicate your time and your skill set to certain groups. For example, I'm constantly looking for attorneys for the work I do. I'm constantly looking for people to help me, project managers and retired physicians. By lending your time to those of us who are involved in this full time, that's one of the ways that we can move the needle. So if your church or an organization has gone woke, remember you're not alone. Follow the steps, document, publicize, educate yourselves, understand what's going on, find organizations, volunteer your time. I would ask them the following question. Under what condition would you be willing to revise your belief? What could somebody show you and they would say, wow, geez, you're right. It's not just that. So that's the first thing I would do. And then I would really genuinely listen to what they had to say and see if you could provide that and see if that's reasonable. I recommend documenting, I recommend filming, and I recommend not challenging, but asking questions, specifically asking questions about how they know that. How do you know, for example, white fragility? How do we know that? Does that apply in other spaces or in other arenas? When people tell you about equity or diversity and inclusion, always make sure you ask for a definition of those words and what people mean by those words. Are they trafficking in ordinary language or are they trafficking in other language? The word part is extremely important, and I have videos, 1-minute videos coming out explaining how woke people use words. The word component of this is extremely important because people are using words in different ways and they're talking past each other. So if you go to a diversity training, your first order of business is to really understand what's being said, document if possible. Often they won't let you record or document, but if you can document, and 2, focus on asking questions, and those questions should revolve around what words mean. And then see, do the words actually mean that? One common confusion, for example, is the difference between equity and equality. These are opposites. These are not the same words. Here's a simple thing you can ask. Can you think of a single sentence in which the word equity can be swapped for the word equality and the meaning of the sentence will remain the same? I don't think it's possible. And I don't think it's possible because those words mean different things. Who cares about whether or not a belief is espoused by people on the right or the left? The only thing that matters is whether or not it's true. Yeah, there are a lot of tactics. I mentioned some in the series. 1, asking a disconfirmation question. Under what conditions could that belief be false? 2, when you look at the literature on cult exiting, why people leave cults, it's not that their belief systems are necessarily disrupted, it's their interpersonal milieu is disrupted. The individuals within that, either there's some form of treachery or there's some form of betrayal, or people make new friends and have new friendships, and those friendships guide them out of those relationships. Even in that case, again, as a theme that's emerged in this video, is you want to treat people with kindness and decency. The other thing you can do, in addition to just focusing on broad-based epistemology, which is how people know what they claim to know, and we wrote about this in How to Have Impossible Conversations. There are 36 techniques. What to do if somebody offers a belief and you don't think that that person actually believes that belief. So here's one thing you can do. You can ask them to put the belief on a scale. On a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you in this? The more ideologically captured one is, the higher number one will give. So they'll say 10. So the response if someone says 10 is, so that's interesting. So that belief isn't formed on the basis of evidence. They'll usually say, well, what do you mean by that? Or what are you talking about? And the response to that is, well, if a belief is formed on the basis of evidence, then there must be some evidence that could come along that would cause someone to doubt that belief. And if you're telling me your belief is 10 on a 1 to 10, in other words, you're 100% positive and there's no evidence that would change it, it's basically a religiously held belief, right? Notice how I ended that in a question. So you're always ending and asking questions. So questions give you hooks. They give you things to hook onto so you can ask more questions to probe their epistemology and further instill doubt. But in each of these cases, there's a sequence. It's establishing a safe environment, a psychologically safe environment that includes building rapport, asking disconfirmation questions, asking questions about how they know things, asking if their beliefs are based on evidence, asking a version of what's called the outsider test for faith. John W. Loftus does a wonderful job for this. It's basically looking at your faith, in this case, considering wokeism a kind of faith, looking at your faith in the same way that outsiders look at it. So, for example, if you're born into a system of Christianity, it's just normal and natural to believe that Jesus walked on water. If you're born into Buddhism, it's just normal and natural. Everybody believes that the Dalai Lama reincarnated throughout bodies and time. But if you're looking at that from an outsider perspective, it's bizarre, it's probably a delusion and it's almost definitely false. So, for example, the Pentecostal believes they can speak in tongues. But if you've been raised in an environment where you've seen people speak in tongues and you've quote unquote witnessed that over time, it's totally normal to you. So one of the things you can do with the woke is help them look at and view things from an outsider perspective. It's not that difficult to do, and it basically deals with asking them targeted, sequenced questions like, put your belief on a scale. Does everybody believe that? In what way could that belief be wrong? Simple, very basic questions that can help people to question and doubt their own belief system. Again, we write about this all in How to Have Impossible Conversations, and there's a specific chapter in chapter 6 in the book that deals with woke ideology. A disconfirmation question is basically asking, under what conditions could a belief be false? The important thing here is that you are not telling someone a belief is false. If you tell someone a belief is false, you create an adversarial relationship. That's also the problem with asking someone why. It seems like a basic question, and in many regards, it's a good question. Well, why do you believe that? If you ask someone, well, why do you believe that? Why do you believe the systemic racism and sexism? Here's what will happen. They'll talk to you and tell you why they believe it, which is exactly what you asked them to do. So they will increase their confidence in a belief when they hear the reasons they have for a belief. But the exact opposite happens. The mechanism is diametrically opposed when you say to them, under what conditions could that belief be false? Instead of talking themselves into a belief and increasing their confidence, they talk themselves out of a belief and decrease their confidence. Many people have never even been asked that question. So if somebody says to you, free speech is just an excuse for you to be racist, that doesn't come out of nowhere. The person who espouses that buys into a radical ideology. The first thing I would ask them is why? Why do they believe that? What's important to understand embedded within that answer is, from the literature, there's something called privilege-preserving epistemic pushback. That's just a fancy way of saying that privilege will do everything and anything it can to preserve itself. And we can't have freedom of speech, because if we have freedom of speech, that's just a way that the privileged can maintain their privileged status and their privileged position. And so what we need to do is we need to undermine the ability for people to say nasty, hurtful things. So it's really important to understand the moral infrastructure for the questions. And once you understand that, you can understand how to respond to those questions. So here's one thing you can do is you can just ask why. And you can really listen to what the person with whom you're speaking has to say. Here's a way to think about it. Again, if someone is more intelligent, this is the question I would ask them. Someone who's less educated and less intelligent, you'd have to go to a different suite of questions. But here's a kind of bundle or basket of questions I'd ask someone. Do you believe that your moral beliefs are rationally derivable? In other words, do you believe they're true because you can know them through reason, or do you think they're just accidents of culture? Most people will say, well, it's just true. There should be universal assent, for example, to the fact that we shouldn't throw gay people off of buildings. Do we know that through reason, or how do we know that? Once you figure out what someone says to that, again, this is a complex problem, so the answer to your question is a little bit longer. So once we know that, if someone says, well, it's all arbitrary, it's just an artifact of culture, well, then you might as well believe anything, right? So if that's what cultural relativism is, that's what moral relativism is, you literally might as well believe anything. But most people will believe that the beliefs that they hold, in this particular case about free speech and not saying things, those are universal values, because the only universal constant is power, and that seeks to preserve itself. So a subsequent question is, so if your beliefs are rationally derivable, then you should want to subject them to reason and scrutiny and have a conversation about those beliefs, no? And then you see what someone says. There are other things you can do along, we'll call this the high road, or the intellectual road. You can ask people, for example, if they can think of times in history where that's not been the case. So, for example, for the civil rights movement, free speech was the very thing that allowed the emancipation of slaves, that allowed the emancipation of LGBT people. And so in each of those cases, the only way we were able to challenge or question the status quo was precisely because we were allowed to have open conversation and honest dialogue. I just read Andrew Doyle's from the UK, his book titled simply Free Speech, and it is an incredibly good book and an easy read to understand basic arguments for free speech. Tell them they're not alone. Encourage them to leave if it's possible. I've stayed at Portland State University a long time for many reasons related to that. And sometimes when you're in an environment, you think it's the right thing to do. For example, if you have a position of authority, if you're teaching, you think it's the right thing to do because if you leave that environment, those students, they'll have nothing. They'll have nobody. They'll have nowhere to go. They'll have nobody to speak with. The other thing that I think keeps people understanding the motivations for why people stay in those positions for a long period of time is that they think once they leave, the organizational structure will just become a juggernaut and roll over anybody and anything that disagrees with them. And so one way of support is to let people know they're not alone. The second area of support is to talk to and reach out to organizations that are actively involved in this. It used to be years ago that there were free thinkers and atheist movements all along campuses and society, but almost all of those, like almost everything else in society, has become woke. Remember, wokeness is a universal solvent that destroys everything it touches. And the consequence of that is we don't have vibrant institutions anymore where people can have open and honest conversations. Certainly doesn't happen in the classrooms. It's just, by the way, one of the reasons I think podcasts have become so popular and alternative venues like this, media. So what you can do is you can let people know that they're not alone and they can find organizations and groups, and then they can go to you to have honest, open conversations. Undergirding all of that, I would say, is the simple principle, let friends be wrong. Let friends be wrong means it's okay if you don't agree with absolutely everything your friend believes. I know that's a weird idea in 2021, but that's the way it was throughout certainly throughout much of my life. You don't have to believe every single thing someone else believes in order to be friends with them. In fact, some of my richest friendships come from people who don't hold beliefs that I happen to hold. So you can support those people through friendship. You can support those people through encouraging them to leave their current position. You can support them by not just telling them to find an organization, but actually helping them go out and find other non-woke organizations.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you'd like to see more of my work, you can head on over to Locals, which is an awesome free speech platform that won't take down or flag any videos, which YouTube is known to do. It's a great platform because people want to be there and they'll engage in meaningful dialogue with you, and it's awesome. Plus, if you sign up for a paid account, you can get access to content that is exclusive to Locals. You'll find a link for that in the description below. Also, if you ever see me lying down in interviews or in any of the videos, it's because I lived with debilitating back pain for years. So I just wanted to explain that so you understand what's going on. And sometimes my little dog Nora might make an appearance. Nora, come here. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. All right. Thanks, everybody.